Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, back again to talk about the healer assignments for Heroic Ny'alotha, Part 2, as we go through a lot of the middle bosses in the raid, talking about when to align your cooldowns, when the damage is going to be happening, how best to align those Disc Priest ramps. Starting us off, we've got Xanesh, which, much like some of the other bosses in our first video, is pretty simple and straightforward in that there isn't any very hyper-specific areas where you need to use cooldowns if you're positioning properly. If your guild kind of struggles with one of the main mechanics in Soulflay, then they might have a little bit more trouble, and these cooldowns will come in very big handy. Soulflay goes off every 1 minute starting at 20 seconds. When it goes off, it covers about half the raid in an echo of themselves, causing a very large AoE radius that you need to make sure you step away from. If people are not stepping away from them for whatever reason, they're going to take a very large chunk of damage, which is why you're always advised to start utilizing certain cooldowns there very early. Now, keep in mind that the Torment mechanic of this fight, the ticking damage of this encounter, does increase over time. So that makes it all the more likely that you're going to want to make sure that you use more and more raid CDs near the end of the encounter. So for this case, you want to make sure you use healers early on for playing soccer. You'll want to be using 2 healers maximum. Again, depending on your raid size, if you're a 10-man group, just 1 healer then. But generally speaking, you want to use very few healers. So you want to use 2 out of the 3 slots for healers to make sure that you're getting them in early, because they can't go in until 6 minutes later. And by that time, usually the fight should be done by then. So that way, you're going to be able to start using some cooldowns early as damage is going to be low, and attributing them for these Soulflays. Again, at 20 seconds into the fight, the cast will go out. At a minute 20, the cast will go out again, and after an 8 to 10 second delay, the actual explosion and detonation will go off. So 30 seconds, minute 30, 2:30, etc., you're going to have those raid cooldowns at your disposal. And the worse of a job that your raid does at moving out of these areas, the more that you're going to need to lean on damage reduction cooldowns, especially if you know that people need to stand still because of any of the orbs going out or to get away from other players, and you know they're going to be close. Having barrier or devotion aura sort of utilized and attributed to people you can trust and timings you can trust to say, all right, we don't have a specific area for this unless it's the very end of the fight, but if you know that the Soulflay is going to go off nearby a lot of players, let's make sure Disc Priest is the priority to do it first, or Paladin's priority to do it first, and then if it happens again, we'll have the other player use that damage reduction CD there as well. Same thing, it would go as well for Spirit Link Totem, just to be able to balance everybody out and to protect everybody. Spirit Link as well was one of those abilities that when we weren't running full claw split runs, and we started going into all main groups, Spirit Link is something that we definitely leaned on to be able to get everybody back in together, reform everybody after all of the movement, stabilize the group, and then be able to move back into more raid healing cooldowns. So when you're running, obviously with this comp, we have a plethora of raid cooldowns, but it's important to be able to get them on cooldown quickly. That way you're going to be able to save mana in those early phases, and you can play even more aggressive as the fight starts wrapping up. The closer you stay towards the middle of the room, the easier it will be to dodge any of those circles on the ground, so it's another factor to keep in mind. And otherwise, once you have a good cycle and rotation, this fight gets pretty easy outside of soccer mistakes. As we get on into Vexiona, on this fight there is a ton of cleave damage going out, and there's also many opportunities for adds to be cleaved down. So it's always important to remember that you're staying close to the tanks, and tanks know exactly where they need to pick those adds up, because healing aggro can be a real problem as those adds initially come out. Priest, for example, should be using Fade as those adds come out to make sure that they don't accidentally draw aggro, and that the tanks will be able to have every advantage to get them. Despair going out first at 15 seconds, and it seems to come out every 30 to 45 seconds after that. From this point, it's very important to make sure that you're having people focusing on those tanks, because the despair damage can vary from almost nothing into raid wiping depending on the amount of HP that is missing for the tank. And it's a factor of the tank's missing HP while they have this debuff. And as you're seeing in that first 50 seconds point for us, there was a huge burst of damage because our tank was not properly topped off to attribute it. This fight's very cool in that you're bouncing between heavy tank healing as a priority to reduce the raid-wide damage everybody takes, and staying on top of dispels on the other tank who's dealing with the Annihilation, as they're going to be having any of those large ritualists casting the laser beam from Annihilation onto them. You need to be dispelling at around 4 or 5 stacks, and as long as you have 3 or 4 healers, it should not be a problem to be taking care of that. What we did is we just had a priority of this player is the first dispel, this player's second dispel, this player's third dispel. And then our fourth healer, we always set up as a backup. If they saw more than 7 debuffs, they would instant dispel no matter where it went. So in case somebody's running out their goo on the ground to the back of the room and they didn't call it out properly, you have a backup and you're not going to be having your tanks take too much damage. Some of the biggest combos that'll happen with the Void Ascendant tank is you're going to find a number of scenarios where the Annihilation is going out right as they are picking up adds. So they're going to be using that Annihilation to help kill the adds, but they'll also be taking a lot of damage themselves. That's an ideal time to start putting some of the external cooldowns onto them and coordinating with them to make sure that they have exactly what they need. Now, if you're running with a 4 healer comp for this fight, every healer should be dispelling all the time, because I guarantee you there's plenty of debuffs and plenty of movement and plenty of distractions in this counter, so you're going to have higher stacks up onto your tank, and you need to make sure you're staying on top of those dispels. You're also going to be having portals coming up whenever she's in her ground phase. They're going to be coming up around every 30 seconds, and they will release a big burst of damage, so it's important to make sure you're ready for that and able to, again, watch for the tanks, because if you're having that going off while the spare is being placed on the boss tank, it's very easy to take a huge amount of incoming damage. As you enter into the last phase, you're going to be having the Heart of Darkness going off every 30 seconds. So you're going to have a cooldown. You're going to need to have a cooldown required for that. The way that we played it is we were very reactive with our raid cooldowns. If we messed up with Despair, we would start having a quick priority system of just who would slam them down and get them on cooldown. But our priority was to make sure that we always had our cooldowns ready once we transitioned the boss into phase 3, so we'd have what we need. So once you transition again at 40%, you go into phase 3, and the big burst of damage, like I said, Heart of Darkness every 30 seconds, and you'll also have the Desolation on a similar cooldown. The big thing about the Desolation is that it's not that damage intensive, because as long as everybody starts soaking it together. The other factor for Heart of Darkness is that if you're not standing with other players, you will end up getting feared. So there even was a bit of extra damage, I believe, if you're standing with too many people, but that didn't really stop us, and we were happy to stack together to make use of a lot of the AoE healing effects, ground healing effects, Spirit Link Totem, Barrier, you name it. It just got a whole lot easier. So if you're going to be using large defensives, you're going to prefer to use them for Heart of Darknesses rather than Desolations, provided everybody's going to stack up for you. As we move on to the Hivemind, this fight is timing galore, as they have some incredibly precise timings for a lot of the abilities, and it's very easy to predict when that damage is going to be out, which makes it even easier to be able to predict when you need to have your cooldowns. So, on this fight, you start off with the Hivemind swaps. These occur every 90 seconds on Heroic, but interestingly enough, it's a bit different on Mythic. It's around 75 seconds. Whenever these swaps start going out, you're instantly going to be having 15 to 20 seconds of constant rot ticking damage going out as well. You're also going to be having the Echoing Void. So on the pull, you're going to have a Hivemind swap into an Echoing Void, which is that shadow mechanic you're seeing under everybody's feet, which means there's a lot of damage to be healing up on the pull. But that also means that you want to make sure you're not being too aggressive with your mana or with your cooldowns. You want to be able to end that first burst of damage that goes out with around 90% mana, meaning you're leaning on some cooldowns, but you're not going to be overdoing it because you'll need them later. All the darters that you see coming out are an absolute priority to kill. If you're, for example, a Rested Druid, you want to make sure you're using your Ursul's Vortex to keep them in melee as best as you can. Any knockbacks that you have as a priest, stuns that you might have for a variety of classes, all of these to help shut those adds down, keep them close to melee to cleave, greatly reduces the damage, and if your group's doing well, you should not need a cooldown at that point. The next Hivemind swap is going to be around that 130 mark, and it's immediately followed by an Echoing Void. This is a very specific area where it's likely that you're going to be taking a lot of damage, and if you're not prepared for multiple cooldowns here to keep everybody alive, then it's very likely that you're going to lose players. That swap needs to be heavily cooldowned over, and it's immediately followed by a lot of drones coming out, requiring everybody to stack. So you want to be able to have the group quickly collapse after the Echoing Void to top everybody off before more Banelings start coming out. Once the Banelings do come out, that's your time to shine with just getting out of that melee pile, knocking back or pushing back any drones, slowing any drones, again, depending on the pool of cooldowns at your disposal. If you're a monk, ring of piecing them and keeping them in melee while you want to run out, to be able to get away from the Banelings really quickly and watch where they go to play safely. Whether you're, for example, a shaman, you can just drop a quick stun and get out of there very quickly. Whatever cooldowns you have at your disposal, taking advantage of that, keeping the drones away from you so you can more easily get a good vantage point to know where those Banelings are coming from and to take advantage of them. Also, whenever you're having some situations where, again, you have Echoing Void coming out at the same time as the Hivemind swap, taking advantage of taking advantage of Healing Tide Totem or Revival so that people are moving, they're not necessarily able to do as much healing at that specific point. You're able to have something that's instant cast to be able to support everybody and quickly keep them safe until they can stabilize themselves and start casting once again. Overall, this fight is very precise in the timings, so if you're dying at one specific area, it means you need to start reshuffling your cooldowns and putting something a bit stronger in that place. As we move on to Rodsn, immediately after the Hivemind, this fight is very well timed once again. You're going to be having to deal with two different orbs in this encounter, the Vita, which is the Lightning Orb, or the Void Orb. And depending on which one that you kill, you'll be getting a different negative side effect, a different empowerment onto the boss. For us, we killed the Void Orb at the start, and for the majority of this first phase, we just sat in melee the whole time. So once you kill the Void Orb, the Vita Orb empowers the boss, pushing out a large burst of damage. That burst happened to us at 30 seconds into the fight. And you'll have to deal with a Crashing Stalker, and other members of your raid will have to bounce lightning back and forth. From a healer perspective, if you're not chosen for either of those jobs, your job is to make sure you're keeping an eye on the tanks, spot healing any of the players bouncing lightning, and helping to DPS that add down rapidly, because the essences wait for no man. They happen around every 1 minute mark, so it's important to be able to have that add down, dead, and the entire party ready for the next round of essence orbs that start coming out. Once you kill the Vita Orb, the Lightning Orb, then the boss will be Void empowered, and you'll be getting a negative heal absorb effect put onto the entire raid. This soaks up healing and needs to be healed through before you're actually able to increase players' health pools, and that will be very important because there's going to be a whole bunch of pools for you to soak after the fact. You're going to have the Unstable Void, which requires one player to soak each time, but then you're also going to be having the Void Hunter coming out, which is going to be putting out some very nasty circles that need to be soaked by everybody. This Void Collapse reduces the healing taken by the raid by 50%, and it stacks. So if you do not kill that Void Hunter but after the second cast, and he gets a third one off, then you are not going to be able to heal up anybody to be able to mitigate that third cast, and it could get incredibly ugly very quickly. So the ad should only get 2 casts off, wait until that healing debuff falls off, and then you'll be able to just quickly top everybody back off before the next round of essences come out. So this 2-minute period in particular is incredibly important, because around 2:10 you're going to have, at least for our strategy, the Vita Orb impact into the boss once again. So at 2 minutes, the negative healing side effect from that Void Hunter is going to wear off, and then the essence is almost immediately going to spawn. So you need to make sure you have raid cooldowns at the ready, top off everybody's health pools before that Vita Orb strikes and potentially starts killing some players. Once you end up transitioning the boss at 40%, the idea is you have to start worrying about the decaying strikes that go out onto tanks. This strike is based off of the tank's active health pool, or his active health percentage when he gets hit. The higher health that he is, the more damage that he ends up taking. If you have very strong healers, or if you're even overhealing the fight, then you may not have to worry about it at all. But if you're going to be, a little bit low on healers at the time, or you're not that trusting of your tanks, then it's a good idea to make sure you're calling which tank is the active tank, allowing them to drop lower, but not too low. Again, keeping them around 40 to 60% range is always very good. And then once the dot is on them, then feel free to heal as much as you can to make sure that they're stabilized. After that point, it's going to be dodging a lot of these void eruptions that are going to be coming out and putting void zones all over the place. So in fact, spreading out can be pretty good onto this encounter as you go into that final phase, and then it's just going to be big bursts of damage onto players with the charge bonds who need to split them up. If players are spreading properly very early on, we never saw them targeting any healers. It was usually just ranged DPS or melee. We never saw them targeting any healers, but if they do, it's always good to be prepared and spread from other players. Chadhar is a very good doggo, and he does a decent amount of damage as you encounter him on Heroic, and he will be wrapping up our 5-boss look so far. So Umbral Mantle goes out every 20 seconds or so into the fight. He starts off casting it almost immediately. So this is going to be just a little bit of ticking damage that goes out periodically that needs to be healed up for the incoming damage. You'll also have the Umbral Breath, which has a very long wind-up, and at this point, Phase 1 is just about staying on your feet and making sure you're getting away from those fixate targets that are going to be having a large detonation. Now, if you're not standing too close to them on Heroic, you're not going to take any damage. If you're on the opposite side of the room, the damage will be minimal, if non-existent. If you're standing too close to them, it's a safe bet that you're going to take a lot of damage. Around 70%, the boss is going to start eating up that entropic carcass and will be moving on and start placing orbs all around the room that need to be soaked. There was a bug that has since been fixed, which was causing multiple detonations of these orbs, causing even greater amounts of damage if multiple players soaked it. At this point, it'll be some greatly reduced damage, so everybody needs to pile into those orbs quickly, soak them up very rapidly, and reduce the damage that goes out onto the group. These will also be putting forth a pretty nasty dot onto you, so this fight is still going to be a race to get out of this phase quickly and drop this entropic dot away from you. So, keeping in mind, healer CD-wise, if you have very good damage, you're entering into this second phase extraordinarily quickly. But if your damage is a little bit slower, then maybe you want to use one cooldown just to get it cycling and save a bit of healer bandit in phase 1. But that being said, you want to make sure phase 2 you have multiple cooldowns at your disposal to be able to help you deal with a lot of the soaking mechanics that will be going out, which will help you save a lot more mana by the time that you enter the final phase. So any sort of cooldown reduction type abilities, for example, like Revival, that kind of comes to mind, or players that are running Vision of Perfection will likely want to get their raid cooldowns up very quickly throughout this encounter, because if you have excellent damage, we entered that phase 3 around 2.5 minutes, but if your damage is slower, it might be 3-ish minutes before you start going there as well. Something to keep in mind whenever you're using these raid cooldowns is if you know a fight's going quickly, you might just have to stave it for the very end, but if you're not as confident about your DPS, you might need to be holding it just a while longer. Phase 3 is just going to be a straight burn and ever increasing soft enrage, where the boss is just going to be dealing just a little bit more damage every single time, while you still have to deal with fixates from going out and hitting the other side of the room. So at this point, it's prioritizing raid cooldowns so that while a raid cooldown is going off, you're able to top a fixate target and then top everybody else around you. Because topping that fixate target so that they don't get killed by the fixate and that are able to get back to the group successfully is going to be an absolute priority for your group and will help you bring this boss down more easily. Thanks for tuning in, guys, to our quick look at the healing assignments for the Ny'alotha raid. Number 2, going through all the middle bosses in the fights. If you have any questions, depending on your type of raid composition, depending on the cooldowns you have at your disposal, or whatever fight that you might be struggling on, feel free to leave them in the comments down below, or hop into the live stream as we'll be streaming our mythic progression. There are currently 7 bosses into the raid. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch y'all next time.